So very good afternoon to all the participants. So a very warm welcome from the KYSS and GST 108 team. So the objective of today's webinar is to basically discuss on a very important topic in GST now, which is the notices in GST. The law has taken a while to stabilize, and the government had also made it quite clear that once the law stabilizes, there will be scrutiny of the returns filed and of the documents that taxpayers are maintaining with respect to the GST compliances. And as we're approaching the 5th year of GST, July 1st, 2022 will mark completion of 5 years of the law. We can now expect that the notices, in fact, the notices have already started, and we can also expect that more and more notices will keep coming under GST. And that is the objective of conducting this webinar today, to help all the MSME business owners who are a part of our call today to understand and explain what these notices are, and also what are the types of notices, what are the do's and don'ts that the taxpayers need to follow while responding to notices. We will move ahead. So all of us would have heard these terms. Under many compliances, it could be income tax, it could be a lot of other compliances that businesses are running. And we have heard this term called notices is a common term that we have all heard. But with respect to GST, what are these notices? In very simple terms, they are various communications that the GST department is going to issue to the taxpayer. Now, this can be for various activities, but majorly for inspection of records, for verifying any sorts of data mismatch in the returns that are filed by the taxpayers, or simply to just call for some submission of information. The department uses these notices. It's just a department communication. That is what is called notices. And why does the department issue notices? So before the department can act, can give a directive, can give an order to any taxpayer, the first step is notices. So that's the first course of action that the department uses. And after the notice is sent and after responses are made by the taxpayer is when the department will go ahead and issue orders or carry out any sort of an action. Very important, where are these notices in GST? Most of the notices are now online. So on the GST portal, once you log in, you will see these notices. They are all online, and the submission of records or responding to these notices also can be done online. However, the other means that the department could possibly use for different types of notices could be sending these notices through emails. This will come to the registered email of the taxpayer, whatever has been provided at the time of registration under GST. They can hand deliver these notices. They can send out a registered post or a courier of these notices. Now, if all of these means are not working for various reasons, that the emails are not being delivered, posts are not being delivered, they can also go ahead and publish a notice in the local newspaper where the taxpayer is registered, in the area where the taxpayer is registered. And if this also fails, the last course of action for the department is to prominently paste the notice in the last known official address. As per the records, whatever is the last known official address of the business, the department can go put up a notice in that last known address, but the newspaper publications and affixing the notice is a last resort of the department. Usually it's all online, and then it is either by emails, by hand delivering it, or by sending a post or a courier. If all of this fails, then the other means also can be carried out by the GST department. The next big question on the portal, where do we see this? You log in onto the portal, you see a dashboard, but under the services head, if you scroll to user services, there is something called a view notices and orders. This is where the taxpayers can go and view the notices and orders. This will show the list of all kinds of notices. And if the department has provided a facility for response and the time limit for response is still available, the response also can be furnished online. So on the portal, the moment you log in, like it's shown on the screen now, under the services tab, there's a user services. Under the user services, there is a view notices and orders. So this is exactly where on the portal that the users can check their notices. It is recommended that taxpayers regularly check this so that you don't miss out on any notices. Now, since serving a notice online is a valid way of serving notice, it is recommended that taxpayers are logging into their portal and viewing these notices and orders from time to time, so that you don't miss out on any notice or you don't miss the timeline for responding to any issue under GST. Very important for taxpayers to know what are the do's and don'ts. Now, before we get into what are the different types of notices, what are the documents to be given, there are certain mandatory things that the taxpayer has to do and the taxpayer should not do. So this is very, very critical for every business owner, because these notices normally create some amount of panic. So it's always good to know what to do and what not to do. So first thing on receiving a notice is that you have to check the nature of the notice. What is this notice for? And the department needs to record the reason. Why has the notice been sent? So this recording needs to be done by the department on the notice, and this needs to mandatorily be checked. What is this notice for and what are the reasons that the department is quoting? Because this is very important to understand before a response is written on these notices. Next, very important, extremely important, is to check the jurisdiction. Which office has issued this notice? Whether that office can issue the notice to you or not. Now, what is very, very critical here is that if a taxpayer receives a notice and without checking the jurisdiction, if a response has been sent, this cannot be challenged at a later date. I'll repeat this point. So if a notice has been received and the taxpayer has not checked from which department this has been sent, whether it's valid or not, and we go ahead and respond to that notice, later if there is a problem in any part of the proceeding, it cannot be challenged, and you cannot say that this is an incorrect jurisdiction, because once a response has been given, the department says that once a response is given, the notice is valid, even if it comes from an incorrect jurisdiction. So it is very, very important to know where your GST is registered, under which office it is registered, and who is the one issuing these notices. This becomes extremely critical for every business owner to check. Next do that the taxpayer has to do is do check whether the officer issuing the notice is competent. In little later, in a couple of slides, we'll come to what are the powers of the department and who can issue these notices. But also please check whether the officer issuing the notice is even competent to issue the notice. Once again, once we respond with all of these defects, then we are agreeing that there are no defects in the notices. The reason why we are making it so clear and stressing on this is that from the department perspective, if you were to go and submit a certain refund application or any application for collection of taxes or whatever that could be, the department can always reject something that is rightfully yours because the process was not followed. If there is a problem in the documentation, the department never accepts a taxpayer's submission with mistakes. They always follow the process, and they will always reject even valid queries if the process is not followed. Now, if the department is allowed to do that, the taxpayer has every right to do the same thing with the department as well. Process of law is same for the department or for the taxpayer. There is no discrimination here. And if the office is not following, the GST department is not following the laid down rules in terms of who can issue it, which officer can issue it, the taxpayer has every right to question this. So please, when the notice is received, please check which office is issuing it, which officer is issuing it. And if there's a problem, please raise your voice and ask the department why this officer or this jurisdiction is receiving it. It is well within the rights of the taxpayer to question the department if process is not followed. It is very critical for taxpayers to know this. Next, very important do for a taxpayer is please do check the date that the notice has been issued on. The date of issuing a notice is the date that we receive it, the taxpayer receives it. So if a post has been sent dated today and the taxpayer receives this 3 days later, the date of issuing of notice is after 3 days when the taxpayer received it in his hand. And the timeline for response will count from that particular day. So the taxpayer needs to very, very, very carefully note when the notice has been issued, when it has been served to the taxpayer, or when the taxpayer has received it. And from there, the time limit will have to be calculated. Very important also, we will see in some of the notices later that there is a certain timeline that the department has to give. So the department cannot expect something that the taxpayer has to respond in a day. These kind of expectations are incorrect from the department. There is clearly a justice that needs to be given. Taxpayers needs to be given a proper opportunity, and timeline needs to be given for notices and for responses. The department cannot issue a notice by saying you respond to it tomorrow. That's not valid. So please check the date of issuing the notice and the time limit that is given. And if there's any discrepancy, it is well within the right of the taxpayer to raise a query to the department. Another very important do is always be open and transparent with the GST departments. Always stick to facts when responding. They do not respond to anything other than facts. So please stick to the facts of the case and use the facility of the online portals, the emails, and the post. Need not go to the department multiple times to visit the officers to meet them. That is not required. The department and the law provides us enough facility for responding online responses, email responses, and responses by post. Preferably also registered post with acknowledgements are better because there is proof of delivery of the documents or of the response that the taxpayer is giving. But these facilities can very well be used. Unnecessary department visits are definitely not encouraged. You need not visit the department multiple times when responding to a notice. Now, while we saw what the taxpayer needs to do, let us also see what you don't have to do or you should not do. First thing is there is no requirement to panic. Please do not panic when a notice is sent. These are just communications that the department issues for want of information or for just scrutinizing records. As long as the tax has been paid, there is absolutely no reason to panic. The taxpayer should never worry when a notice has come. Please go through the notice and responses can be drafted accordingly. Another very important don't in case of responding to notices is do not provide login credentials to the department. Under any circumstance, no taxpayer is obligated to give the user ID and password of the GST to the department. They need not ask for it. And even if they ask for it, 100% the right of the taxpayer to deny. You are not obligated to give them. And another thing is a lot of business owners that we have interacted and a lot of you have registered for the webinar had this question: what to do if you yourself have lost your user ID and password? There is a process to recover it by issuing an affidavit to the department, a letter that is in an affidavit format. A letter can be issued and the user ID and password can be reset. And once that is reset, please keep the user ID and password with yourself. Do not provide it to the department under any circumstance. Another don't when responding to notices is providing a copy of the tally backup, which is your accounting backup, or any accounting ERP. Let's say you're using QuickBooks or Zoho or whatever accounting ERP you may be using. There is no requirement to give the backup of this to the GST department. That could contain business sensitive information and the department need not have access to that. Whatever statements that the department wants can always be given by way of an Excel or a PDF extract. Whatever statements, ledgers they want, you can extract it in an Excel or a PDF format and give it to the department if it's relevant. But the ERP access 100% need not be given to the department under any circumstance. The next don't is do not agree to give to the department any data in a specific format mandated by them. As long as the data required by the department is provided and is maintained in a certain way, we have every right to maintain the records in the way that we understand it, provided it has all the valid information. Now, for example, if you're talking about a sales register, it needs to have the name of the vendor, it needs to have the GST name of the customer, GST IN of the customer, the date of invoice, invoice number, taxable amount, and tax amount. This is what is required. As long as this is available in the information, there is no requirement to put it in a particular format and provide it. There is no mandate that it needs to be provided in a specific format only. Whatever data is available, as long as it is available, all the information is available, it can be furnished as is to the department. The last don't is to not fill up the annexures in the GST audit manual. There is a GST audit manual which is circulated by the department for their internal use. This is to be used by the department while performing the audit for their own requirements for data, for maintenance of data in a certain format. Those annexures are meant for the department and we are not obligated as taxpayers to fill up that GST audit manual and provide it. So these are very, very important don'ts when a notice has been received and you're responding to the notice. What are the powers of the department? Now, the law clearly states that cross empowerment is not allowed. What does this mean? Officer of one jurisdiction cannot issue notices to somebody belonging in another jurisdiction. To give a simple example, let's say your GST is registered in Mumbai. An officer sitting in Chandigarh or Madhya Pradesh or Gujarat cannot issue a notice to a taxpayer sitting in Maharashtra. That is very so. Now, to know what your jurisdiction is, there is an option called search taxpayer on the GST portal. There, once you type your GSTIN number, you can see which department is monitoring your GST ID, and that is the jurisdictional department, and that is the department which can issue communications to the taxpayer. So any notice that comes from any other jurisdiction, well within the right of the taxpayer to question why that has come from another jurisdiction. It is well within the taxpayer's right, so please do question it. And the next, competency of the officer. Now, to conduct a scrutiny of returns, if the office wants to go through, wants to inspect the GSTR1, GSTR3B, GSTR9, all the different types of returns filed, that can be only done by the superintendent of central taxes. That is the designation of the officer. And whoever is that officer for the particular jurisdiction, only the superintendent can scrutinize the returns. So if there are any notices issued, let's say by somebody of a lower cadre, like an inspector or a caseworker, these notices need not be responded to because the minimum authority for scrutinizing is already provided by the department. Another very important aspect to remember is that the department themselves in their guidelines tell that the scrutiny of returns should have minimal interaction between the officer and registered person. All the data is available online, all the data is available on the portals, especially returns filed in GSTR 1 and 3B and annual returns filed in GSTR 9 are all available in the dashboard of the officer. It's all on the online portal. What we file from our front end in the portal is available with the department. So these data that the department already has in their dashboard needs to be verified by them online. They need not ask for the data, and you are also not obligated as a taxpayer to submit these responses. Let's say GSTR 1, 3B need not be furnished to the department. The department circular itself mentions that these scrutiny of returns of data that is already available in the GST portal should have minimal interaction. They can do it all by themselves on the dashboard and then issue whatever information, further information that they require. The last very important point to remember is that any action taken by the department, any order, any direction that the department issues without giving the taxpayer an opportunity to respond, or by not considering, let's say you have submitted a response, but the department has not considered that response and gone ahead and given an order, that order is invalid. It is a long-standing principle of any law, especially of the Indian law, that justice needs to be given to everybody. It's called a principle of natural justice in legal language that is available to every taxpayer. If a notice has been issued, it is well within the right of the taxpayer to always respond and ensure that the responses are taken on record. The department cannot give orders, cannot take action without considering what the taxpayer has submitted. The taxpayer has every right to be heard. So please ensure that you are given that right to respond and that your submissions are considered as well. Now, what are the necessary documents that the taxpayer needs to maintain? Usually, when a notice is sent, every business owner should maintain these data so that you are ready to submit any response or give any reconciliation to the department. Please keep ready the copy of your signed financial statements, which is the balance sheet, profit and loss account, schedules to accounts, for whichever year is under audit. Please keep that ready with you, so that this is one of the basic statements with which the GST records have to be matched. The monthly GST workings, whatever has been used, it could be in Excel format, whatever has been used for filing the GSTR 1 and 3B, that needs to be kept ready. The GST reconciliation sheet, if there is any difference between the data of GST return and data of books, that needs to be reconciled, that needs to be matched, and that Excel needs to be maintained. Reconciliation of input tax credit, what is available in the GSTR 2A versus what has been taken in the books of account, that needs to be reconciled. Our portal KYSS also does this reconciliation for you. So you may please make use of, you may take benefit of this reconciliation and maintain that on record. The other extracts from the books of account, from whatever accounting ERP that you're using, it could be Tally, it could be QuickBooks, it could be so. The extracts that needs to be maintained is the sale register. If you are doing both taxable and exempt sales, that needs to be specifically mentioned in the sales register. The purchase register, whatever goods have been purchased or services have been taken, the register of that. if tax has been paid under reverse charge. We will not get into in detail of to what reverse charge is, but normally Mr. A is issuing services to Mr. B. Mr. A to collect the tax from B and pay to the government. But if the service recipient, so A is giving services to B, instead of A the tax from B and paying it to the government, if B is directly paying the tax to the government, that is called a reverse charge mechanism. We will not get into too much technicality at this point, but if a reverse charge tax has been paid, the register of that also needs to be readily maintained. For any business owner or taxpayer doing exports, that also as a separate register needs to be maintained. Or if you're giving services to special economic zones, that register also needs to be maintained. I would just like to add at this point, if any of our participants today have a question, please drop it on our chat box and we will take it at the end of this webinar. Now, what are the different types of notices or the important types of notices under GST? One very common notice that most of you would have seen is called the GSTR 3A. These are the technical terms, but what it basically means is that if a return has not been filed in time, it could be GSTR 1, it could be 3B, or it could be any other return. If the return is not filed in time, a GSTR 3A is sent to the taxpayer as a default notice that you have not filed your returns. The action is very simple. Within 15 days from receiving the notice, the return needs to be filed. And whatever late fees are applicable, the late fee needs to be paid. And if there is any interest to be paid on the GST tax liability that is there, that also needs to be paid. Now, what happens if the response is not done? Based on whatever information is available with the department can assess a tax and say that this is the liability. So that is the consequence of not responding. So it is always suggested that within 15 days from receiving this notice, please file the returns and respond. Otherwise, the department may assess the tax at a much higher liability also based on whatever information they have, because they don't have the information that we are supposed to be furnishing to the department. So this is one of the very common notices that are sent. The next type of notice is at the time of registration. When a new registration is made under GST, the department can send a notice asking for more information. Now, this information could be clarity on whatever documents have been filed, or further documents also. Let's say an address proof is not valid, they can ask for a further address proof, or if promoters or the business owners IDs are incorrect, they can ask for all these information. Or if they simply want more clarification on the nature of business, they can ask that also, and that is sent by a notice called REG03. Now the response needs to be sent within 7 days from receiving the notice. It is straight for whatever the clarification the department is asking that needs to be responded to. And if the response does not go, then the application for registration can be rejected. So that is the next type of notice. The next type is a very critical notice, because this is something that you would have already seen. Some of our participants may have seen, but a lot of the participants will be seeing these notices. It's a data mismatch notice. It's called ASMT 10. It is a very simple scrutiny notice. Wherever there is any mismatch in data as per the data available with the department and the GST returns filed by the taxpayer, if there is any mismatch, this notice is usually sent. And this can be responded to online. There is a certain format for responding to it online on the portal, and that online portal format is called the ASMT 11. In that, the taxpayer, within the time that is prescribed by the notice, usually they give 7 days to 30 days time to respond. Minimum 7 days, maximum 30 days. The department does give the time to respond. Within that time, online, the taxpayer has to go online and respond to that notice with whatever data mismatch the department is quoting. Now, if you don't respond to it, then the department may go ahead and assess a tax liability and send a demand notice for that. Now, what are the cases? What is this data mismatch? What are the circumstances under which a data mismatch notice can be sent? Now, if in GSTR 1 return, which is the return on sales, a certain tax has been declared, and that is different from the tax that is declared in the summary return in GSTR 3B, that is one possibility of a data mismatch. Tax in GSTR 1 not matching the tax as per GSTR 3B. Another reason could be if it's a supplier of goods and e-way bills have declared a certain sales volume based on every e-way bill filed during the month, but the GSTR 3B shows a much lesser tax than what has been declared by way of the e-way bills. That is also a possible data mismatch. So e-way bill tax is higher than the tax shown in the GSTR 3B. The next, in fact, very common form of data mismatch is the input tax credit that has been claimed is in excess of the tax available as per the GSTR 2A. That is another possible data mismatch. Another possible case of an ASMT 10 data mismatch notice is if the input tax credit has been claimed after the expiry of period to claim. Now the taxpayer is given time up to November. Now, for example, for the financial year 21-22, just concluded March 2022, the taxpayer has time up to 30th November 2022 to claim whatever credit was missed out. Between April 1st, 2021 to 31st March 2022, you have a time limit up to 30th November 2022 to claim this input tax credit if you have missed out. But now after 30th November, if an ITC has been claimed for this period, that is also a next possible cause for giving a data mismatch notice. Another case could possibly be that the input tax credit is claimed on certain invoices from certain businesses whose registration has been cancelled. Let's say Mr. A took some services from Mr. B and claimed input tax credit on that, but Mr. B's registration has been cancelled. That also is a cause for data mismatch because that input tax credit that is claimed is not valid because Mr. B's registration has been cancelled. That is also a possible data mismatch. And another very common case of data mismatch is there is taxes have been paid beyond the due date, after due date taxes have been paid, but interest has not been paid on the same. That is also another possible cause of a data mismatch. The next important notice under GST is the audit notice. It's called the ADT for audit, ADT 01. This is basically done usually for an entire year, for a period. And this is for the department to assess in general whether the compliances have been met by the taxpayer and also have all returns been filed, has all the data that is required to be maintained in the law has been maintained or not. So usually this ADT1 is used for scrutinizing records and in general compliance of the taxpayer for a particular period. The taxpayer could be required to attend in person, as it depends on the notice. The department can ask the taxpayer or the authorized representative to attend in person and produce the records, or it can be online as well. The time limit is usually prescribed on the notice itself, but normally a 30-day time is given in case of an ADT1 notice. The next two forms of notices again are quite common, and a lot of our participants may have seen this. Is REG 17 is the show cause notice for cancellation of GST. Why GST should not be cancelled? That is REG 17, a show cause notice. Show cause basically means the taxpayer needs to explain to the department as to why the department should not take a particular action. That's why it's called a show cause, notice to show cause. So if the GST registration has to be cancelled for whatever reasons that could be mentioned in the notice, the reasons are usually recorded. A show cause notice is usually sent in REG 17 for the same, and the taxpayer is required to respond to this with reasons as to why the GST need not be cancelled. And if the taxpayer does not respond, the GST registration is cancelled subsequently. The REG 23 is the reverse. If a GST is cancelled and the taxpayer has applied for revocation of that, for basically renewing his GST after a cancellation, the department can again send a show cause notice asking why the cancellation must be revoked, why the cancellation must be removed. And that is the REG 23. Again, 7 days time is given. And if the taxpayer is able to give a valid response to this, the cancellation will be removed and the GST will be given, the GST number will be given back. Another form of notice is the REG 31, again going to be quite a common notice that we can see in the coming months and in the coming years. If there is a significant data mismatch that the department is observing between the GSTR 3B and the GSTR 1, or the GSTR 3B and the GSTR 2B for input tax credit, the department can send a notice to suspend the GST till such time that the taxpayer explains the differences. So this is another form of notice that the department has started sending, and 30 days time is usually given to explain why the differences are there. And if the taxpayer is able to explain the differences, then the suspension is removed and the taxpayer can continue his business normally. DRC 01 is in very simple terms a demand notice for collection of taxes. A lot of us would have seen these notices under income tax. A tax demand challan will be sent. The challan under GST to collect taxes, which is due to the department, is called a DRC 1. It is usually sent along with another statement which will explain the calculation behind the demand, that is called a DRC02. So DRC01 is a tax challan for payment of taxes, and the DRC2 is the statement that the department will send with the calculations and details as to why this demand has been raised. The response from the taxpayer is that you have to either, if you disagree with the tax demand, you have to respond with why you disagree, or otherwise reply with by paying the taxes by way of a DRC03. DRC03 is the mode to pay the taxes. Usually the tax demand, DRC01, will be issued after a scrutiny proceeding is completed. So normally this will not have a dispute with the taxpayer, because this is after the taxpayer has submitted responses, an order will be sent by the department, and after everything is agreed, the demand notice will be sent. Within 30 days of receipt of the DRC01, which is the demand, the taxpayer needs to pay the taxes. Now, one thing that needs to be also noted is that when there is no fraud committed by the taxpayer, and if the payment is made within the time limit prescribed in DRC01, there should be no cause for a penalty being charged. So please always assess the reason as to why the penalty is charged. And if there is a penalty in the DRC01 that is charged by the department, within the right of the taxpayer to always question why the penalty has been charged. So we request all the participants to make note of this as well. The last two form of notices that we'll discuss today is another CMP 05. CMP basically means composition. CMP 08 is the composition return. So CMP 05 is the notice. Now, if a particular taxpayer is opting for the composition scheme under GST, and if the department has a question as to why or whether this taxpayer is eligible for composition, then a show cause notice can be issued in CMP 05, and the taxpayer's action is that they should respond to this notice within 15 days by mentioning why they are eligible for opting for the composition scheme under GST. Composition scheme, again, we'll not get into the technicality of this, but largely is applicable for people who are doing sales within the state, sale of goods within the state with a turnover less than 1.5 crores for the year. That is usually largely the eligibility. There are a lot of smaller aspects to note in case of composition, but we are not getting into that detail today. The last form of an important notice that we'll discuss today is the RFD 08. So whenever the taxpayer applies for a refund, now refund also in particular can be eligible to a taxpayer under certain circumstances. In that, if the taxpayer has filed for a refund application under those particular circumstances, and the department has a particular clarification, or they don't feel that the taxpayer is eligible for that refund, they can send a notice in RFD 08 asking the taxpayer to justify why this refund why the refund is eligible to the taxpayer, and the taxpayer needs to go ahead and respond by saying that this is the reason why we are eligible, or this is the reason why the department cannot reject the refund. And this response needs to be made again within 15 days from the date of receiving the notice. If the taxpayer does not respond, then the refund application will be rejected by the department.